Welcome to the TheDreadJournal. I am Ulrich Mossberg, and I shall be your guide through some of the most horrifying true stories sent to us. These stories are not urban legends, myths, or tall tales. They are true testimonials sent to us by those who feel they must hide their identities, either due to the question of their sanities or hiding from authorities, both real and from beyond. Despite this, they still want to be heard, and so we have given them a voice. Today, we'll be looking over some of the most terrifying tales sent to us from those who have either worked in a cemetery or visited one, only to learn horrible truths that change their lives forever. Let us look into some of these tales and see what will forever be added into the TheDreadJournal. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Harper, and I'm 34 years old. I've always been someone who values order, efficiency, and rational explanations. I have a doctorate in archival science, and I've spent my career organizing historical tools, records, creating databases, and bringing outdated filing systems into the digital age. I don't believe in supernatural nonsense. I believe that for every strange occurrence, there's a logical explanation waiting to be discovered. That's why I took the job at Graymoor Cemetery in western Massachusetts, digitizing their genealogical records dating back to 1843. The previous clerk had been admitted to Meadowbrook Psychiatric Hospital after suffering what the cemetery board had called a complete mental breakdown. According to the board, he'd become obsessed with the records, claimed that they were alive, and that messing with them was inviting some kind of curse. He'd stopped coming to work, started making frantic phone calls about names appearing in documents, and finally had to be institutionalized when he tried to burn the record archives. The cemetery board assured me that the previous clerk had pre-existing mental health issues, that the job had simply been too stressful for him. They needed someone stable, rational, and efficient to complete the digitization project. I was all three, and I didn't believe in curses. Though I wish I did. The records were stored in the basement archives of Graymoor's administration building, leather-bound volumes containing burial certificates, plot assignments, and maintenance logs spanning over 180 years. My job was to scan each document, create a searchable digital database, and preserve the originals in climate-controlled storage. The work was tedious but satisfying. I liked the precision of it, the way that chaotic historical records could be transformed into organized, accessible information. Then, in my second week, I found the inconsistencies. A burial certificate from 1887, recording the death of a man named Thomas Whitfield, signed by funeral director Arthur Pemberton. Standard documentation. But Arthur Pemberton's own death certificate, dated 1889, was also in the records, and his burial certificate was signed by funeral director Arthur Pemberton. He'd signed off on his own death, 2 years after the first signature. I checked the signatures carefully. They were identical. Same handwriting, same flourish on the capital letters, same precise formation of each character. These weren't forgeries or mistakes. The same person had signed both documents. But that was impossible. Arthur Pemberton couldn't have signed his own burial certificate in 1889 if he was already dead. The only way he could is if he'd signed it before he died, but that made no sense. Or someone had forged his signature, which was oddly specific and pointless for a document from over a century ago. I found more examples as I continued digitizing. Funeral directors signing death certificates dated after their own recorded deaths, sometimes months later, sometimes years. Always the same handwriting, always the same signature, as if the deceased directors had continued their work beyond the grave. Interesting historical anomaly, I noted in my digitization log. Likely administrative errors or record-keeping confusion common in 19th century documentation. I didn't think about it again until the next morning. When I arrived in my office that day, I found new signatures in documents I'd scanned. A burial certificate for Michael Brennan, dated November 20th, 2024, last Friday, signed by funeral director Thomas Whitfield, whose own death certificate showed that he died in 1887. The signature was fresh, not faded like the other historical entries, but dark black ink that looked like it had been written yesterday. I checked my digital scans from Friday. The signature hadn't been there when I'd photographed the document. The entry for Michael Brennan had existed. He was the cemetery's groundskeeper, recently deceased from a heart attack, but the funeral director's signature line had been blank. Now it was filled in with handwriting from 137 years ago. I found 4 more recent burial certificates with recent fresh signatures from long-dead funeral directors. All of them were dated within the past month. All of them were signed with ink that looked impossibly new. The next morning, I found signatures on burial certificates that hadn't been filled out yet. Certificate of interment, name Patricia Donnelly, date of death November 28th, 2024, signed Arthur Pemberton, funeral director. Patricia Donnelly was the cemetery's administrative assistant. I'd seen her an hour ago in the break room, very much alive, complaining about the fact that her daughter was getting married soon and that the expenses were piling up. According to their certificate, she would die in 3 days. There were 5 others, all cemetery employees, all with death dates in the near future, all signed by funeral directors who'd been dead for over a century. "This is a prank," I said aloud, my voice echoing in the empty archive room. "Someone is messing with the records." I called Raymond Chen, the cemetery's night security guard, and asked him to review the previous night's footage. Raymond pulled up the security system. "Well, your office door was locked all night, see? No one entered. The system logs every time that door opens. There is a digital record to prevent tampering with sensitive documents. Same with the treasurer's office and the archivist's storage room." "Well, then someone accessed the documents before they were locked away." "Dr. Harper, I watched you lock them in the cabinet at 5 p.m. No one touched them until you unlocked the cabinet this morning. The cameras show the archive room door was closed all night. There was no tampering." Back in my office, I examined the certificates with fresh signatures. The ink looked standard, nothing unusual about its composition, but the timing was wrong. These signatures appeared overnight in locked documents. Then I remembered something from my archival training. Invisible ink that becomes visible when exposed to heat. Prank technique, which was simple but effective. I held one of the certificates near my desk lamp, letting the warmth from the bulb heat the paper. New text appeared in the cause of death field, text that hadn't been visible before. Cause of death, vehicular accident, Route 9 near mile marker 47. And below the funeral director's signature, another name appeared in fresh, dark ink. Kenneth Delacroix. Kenneth was the cemetery's treasurer, office 2 doors down from mine. I'd spoken to him this morning about budget allocations. Temperature-activated ink. Someone's playing an elaborate prank with specialty inks that reveal themselves under the specific conditions. But I was unnerved that the prank specifically targeted my coworkers. In the detail about Route 9, mile marker 47, that was oddly specific for a joke. I resumed my digitization work, trying to ignore the growing unease in my stomach. Then, Patricia Donnelly died on November 28th, exactly as her certificate predicted. Sudden stroke while shopping for wedding decorations. Dead before the ambulance arrived. Kenneth Delacroix died on December 2nd. Vehicular accident on Route 9, near mile marker 47. His car had inexplicably swerved off the road into a tree. 3 other cemetery employees died over the next week, all matching the death dates and causes listed on certificates that I had found in the records. Certificates that had been blank, then filled in with signatures from long-dead funeral directors. And then I realized something horrifying. The deaths had started accelerating after I'd heated the documents with my lamp. Before I'd done that, only Patricia's certificate had shown a death date. After I'd applied heat, revealing Kenneth's name and cause of death, the others had appeared too. Warming the pages made the predictions happen faster. So, against my better judgment, I drove to Meadowbrook Psychiatric Hospital to visit the previous records clerk, Martin Keyes. I needed to understand what had happened to him, whether he'd experienced the same thing. Martin was 53, gaunt and pale, sitting in the hospital's common room staring at nothing. When I introduced myself as his replacement, his eyes focused with sudden intensity. No, no, you have to run. Run before you kill everyone in the town. Whoa, Mr. Keyes, I just need to understand what happened to you. The pages. You've been reading them, opening them, warming them up. Every time you expose a new name, you're making it real. Our records don't predict deaths, they cause them. Stop reading them. Destroy them, or everyone in Greymore is going to die. What? No, that's not rational. Documents can't cause deaths. There has to be a logical explanation for this. He slammed his fist on the desk with a loud thud. There is! The cemetery was built on cursed ground. The founders knew it. The records are the curse itself, written in ink that feeds on being read. Every name you see, every page you warm up, every signature that appears, you're giving the curse power. You have to stop before it's too late. The orderlies came and pulled Martin away from me. And I left the hospital convinced that he was exactly where he needed to be. He was delusional, paranoid, dangerous to himself and others. His warnings were the ravings of someone who had had a mental breakdown. I drove back to Greymore, back to my office, back to the records that needed digitizing. I was a professional, so I had a job to complete. I would not be deterred by superstitious nonsense. When I arrived at my office, there was a message on my desk. Martin Keyes had died that morning at Meadowbrook Hospital. He had taken the wrong medication administered by a confused nurse. He had a fatal reaction, and he was dead within minutes. I pulled out the records with trembling hands. Martin's burial certificate was there, dated today, signed by Arthur Pemberton in fresh, dark ink. And below it, new text was appearing, letters forming slowly as if they were being written by an invisible hand. Elizabeth Marie Harper. Date of death, December 19th, 2024. 4 days from now. I ran from my office. I left the records open on my desk. I got in my car and drove, not caring about direction, just needing to be away from Greymore Cemetery and the documents that finally I had to accept that they were cursed because they were writing my name in real time. I drove to another town 2 hours away, checked into a motel under a false name, and tried to tell myself that I was safe, that distance would break whatever was happening. But everywhere I looked, I saw my death date. On the motel's digital clock, 12:19. On a digital receipt from the gas station, transaction number 121924. On a license plate in the parking lot, DEC-19. And then I saw a map on the motel wall, whose tourist maps were showing local attractions. Someone had circled a cemetery in red marker. Riverside Memorial Cemetery, Springfield, Massachusetts, the town I had run to. The text beside the circle, written in handwriting I recognized from the Greymore records. Elizabeth Harper, final resting place. The cemetery was changing. The records were updated. I would die on December 19th, but I wouldn't be buried in Greymore anymore. I'd be buried no matter where I ran to, because the records adapted, evolved, predicted not just death, but every detail of what came after. That's why, when I saw that there was somebody collecting these stories and posting them online, I knew I had to do the same. I had to send this to TheDreadJournal on December 15th, 2024. I have 4 days left. I know I can't run from this. Martin Keyes tried to warn me, and I didn't listen. He died for trying to stop me from making this mistake. The records at Greymore Cemetery are still in my office, still open on my desk, still writing new names and death dates in ink that appear from nowhere. Someone needs to find them and destroy them before they kill everyone in the town. Burn them, shred them, pour acid on them. I don't care how you do it. Just destroy those records before they finish writing their way through every living person in Greymore. And I don't think it'll stop there. The curse feeds on being read, and I fed it for weeks before I understood what the hell was going on. Every page I scanned, every document I digitized, every time I tried to apply heat to reveal hidden text, I was giving the curse more power to predict, to cause, to execute deaths with perfect precision. Death always has its due. And the Graymore records are the invoice, written in advance, signed by funeral directors who never stopped working even after their own deaths. If you're reading this or listening to this, however the TheDreadJournal does this, then please, before December 19th, whenever my name becomes the latest signature in that ledger that should have never been opened, please find someone to destroy it. The curse won't stop in Graymore. Don't let yourself be the next one to have their name written down.
I'm typing this up while my family is asleep. My wife, bless her heart, wouldn't dream of speaking about this to another person. Then I learned about the TheDreadJournal. Even if she finds out I sent this story to this channel, there's not much she could do about it. I just need someone to know what happened. People have lost their lives due to this, and I can't live with myself if I don't let someone know. My name is Robert Chen, and I'm 46 years old. I ran Chen's Floral Design in Blackwood, Oregon, a small shop that my parents started back in 1982. I grew the flowers, my wife Linda handled the books, and we built a good, quiet life. Our 2 kids are in middle school, business pays well enough to support our lifestyles, and we can sometimes take vacations every few years or so. We specialize in flower arrangements for funerals. It's steady work, respectful work, and I take pride in creating beautiful tributes for the deceased. I never thought that work would put my family in danger. I never thought that work would end up taking the lives of people. It started 3 months ago with an unusual order. Most funeral arrangements are purchased by family members who come to the shop or call from recognizable numbers. This order came through our online system at 2 a.m. A standing arrangement for weekly delivery to Oakwood Cemetery, plot 247, section C. The customer name was Margaret Whitfield. Payment confirmed immediately from a Wells Fargo account. Delivery instructions, placed directly on headstone, no contact necessary. I prepared the arrangement personally. White roses and lilies, classic and elegant. That Saturday, I drove to Oakwood Cemetery and found plot 247 in section C. The headstone read, Margaret Ann Whitfield, 1934 to 2018. Beloved grandmother and mother. The name matched the order exactly. Must be a descendant, I reasoned. It's probably some daughter or granddaughter with the same name ordering flowers for the grave. I placed the arrangement and drove home, thinking nothing more about it. That evening, Linda called me while I was closing the shop. Robert, we have a problem. The bank called. That payment from Margaret Whitfield? That account closed in 2018. They're flagging the payment as fraudulent. Within 2 days, we were under investigation for wire fraud. An FBI agent named Special Agent Michael Torres appeared at our shop with 2 colleagues, demanding to see our financial records and transaction logs. Mr. Chen, you received $4,500 from a bank account that was closed 6 years ago. The account holder is deceased. Can you explain how that's possible? I shook my head at him. I can't. The order came through our online system. The payment was processed normally, and I delivered the flowers as was requested. Someone is using stolen account information to make your purchases through your business. Either you're complicit or your systems have been compromised. Linda pulled up our transaction records, showing years of legitimate business. We've been running this shop for over 40 years. Our family has never... She was interrupted when the phone rang. I answered it out of habit. A woman's voice, faint and distant like a bad connection. Chen's Floral Design. I'd like to place an order for delivery to Oakwood Cemetery, plot 189, section D, weekly arrangement, white carnations. I wrote down the details automatically. May I have your name for the order?
Dorothy Kelvin, payment information is in your system. The line went dead. I checked her online portal. The order was already there. Payment confirmed from a Bank of America account. Torres grabbed my computer and pointed to one of his technicians. That account. Run it. Right now. His colleague made a call, then looked up with confusion. That account belongs to Dorothy Kelvin. Closed in 2015. The account holder is deceased. Someone is watching this shop, Agent Torres said. Oh, they knew we were here. They placed another order to prove a point. Or something is happening, Linda said quietly. Something we can't explain. No, there's always an explanation. We're setting up surveillance at the cemetery. Mr. Chen, you'll make the delivery as scheduled. We'll identify whoever's collecting these orders. On Saturday morning, I drove to Oakwood Cemetery with an FBI surveillance team following me in unmarked vehicles. They positioned themselves throughout the cemetery. They had cameras and recording equipment covering every inch and every approach to plot 189, Section D. I placed the white carnations on Dorothy Kelvin's headstone, died 2015, age 73, and returned to my car. The FBI agents waited for 3 hours. No one approached, no one collected the flowers, no one appeared. Agent Torres called me that evening. We reviewed every second of footage, no suspicious activity, no one approached that grave except you. I sounded confused. Wait, then who's placing the orders? Well, that's what we're going to find out. Your wife showed us decades of clean financial records. We believe that you're not involved in fraud, but someone is using your business, and we need your cooperation. Okay, so what do you want us to do? Simple. The next order you receive, you don't deliver it. You call us immediately, and we'll trace it in real time. Issue a refund, and see if we can track anything from where the money goes. Linda and I agreed. I mean, it's not like we had much of a choice. If we refused, then we could be considered complicit in whatever was going on, or we could be charged with obstruction of justice for whatever reason. So, the next morning, when the phone rang at 6 a.m., I heard the same distant, hollow voice. Chen's Floral Design. I'd like to place an order for Oakwood Cemetery, Plot 52, Section A, Red Roses. May I have your name? I asked, and I signaled Linda to call Agent Torres. Thomas Brenner. Payment confirmed. I hung up immediately and tried to process a refund. The system showed the payment, but when I attempted the refund, an error message appeared. Account does not exist. Agent Torres arrived within 30 minutes with a technical team. They installed recording equipment on our phone lines, computers, and security cameras. Whatever happens next, we'll document everything. That night, Torres and 2 other agents stayed in our shop with their monitoring equipment. Linda and I sat in the back office. We were exhausted and terrified. At 11:47 p.m., the phone rang. There was no caller ID, just static. Agent Torres insisted on answering, and we put it on speaker so the recording equipment could capture everything. Chen's Floral Design, he said professionally. Silence. Then a voice. Faint, hollow, but unmistakably similar to Torres's own voice. I'd like to place an order for Oakwood Cemetery, Plot 412, Section F. White lilies and roses, for the grave of Michael Anthony Torres. Torres went pale. What? What did you say? Michael Anthony Torres. The date of death? December 17th, 2024. That was tomorrow. The line cut dead. Every device in the shop went dark simultaneously. Computers, lights, recording equipment, everything. The backup generators didn't engage. The emergency lights didn't activate. We were in complete darkness. I pulled out my phone and I used its flashlight. We need to leave. Now! But Torres was staring out the front window toward the cemetery, which was visible in the distance. Do you hear that? A phone was ringing, distant but clear, going through the night, coming from the direction of Oakwood Cemetery. Torres drew his weapon, and his 2 colleagues did the same. Stay here, lock the doors. If we're not back in 30 minutes, call for backup." They left, walking toward the sound of the ringing phone. Linda and I watched from the window as their flashlights disappeared into the cemetery grounds. They never came back. By morning, the FBI investigation was quietly closed. When I called the local field office, they had no record of Special Agent Michael Torres ever being assigned to our case. The surviving files from the case were sealed, classified, and inaccessible to us now. The cemetery where Torres and his colleagues had entered showed no signs of disturbance. There was no bodies, no evidence, no nothing. On December 17th, exactly as the voice had predicted, the local news reported that FBI Special Agent Michael Torres had died in a car accident on his way home from a case. The two agents who'd accompanied him were killed in the same crash. The official report said brake failure, but Linda and I knew the truth. The voice had ordered flowers for Torres's grave a day before he died. The cemetery had called him, and he'd answered. And now he was buried in Plot 412, Section F, at Oakwood Cemetery. We closed Chen's Floral Design the next week. We packed up everything, moved our family 3 states away, and started over. We opened up a new shop, but we have one absolute rule. We only accept orders from customers who come in person. We don't have any phone orders. We don't have any online orders. We don't make any deliveries to any cemeteries unless the customer is standing right in front of us. Our kids asked why we had to move so suddenly. Told them that we wanted a fresh start. We wanted better opportunities for them. But they don't need to know the truth. Sometimes, late at night, Linda swears she hears the phone ringing before it actually does, like a faint echo, a call coming from underground. And sometimes, I wake up at 2 a.m. and checked our closed online portal, terrified that I'll find a new order waiting, an order with my name, an order for flowers to be delivered to a grave that doesn't exist yet. We ran from Oakwood Cemetery, from the voices that place orders from closed accounts, from the dead who still tend to their own memorials. But I don't think we're safe. I don't think distance matters, because the dead don't need phones to place calls. They don't need bank accounts to make payments. They just need your business to accept their orders. And once you do, once you deliver flowers to graves and take their money, then you've made a contract that nothing can ever break. My name is Reverend James Whitlock, and I've served as chaplain at Covenant Memorial Park in rural Tennessee for 17 years. I conduct memorial services, counsel grieving families, and provide spiritual guidance to those navigating the difficult journey of loss. I've always believed that death is a threshold, not an ending. I've also been a firm believer in the teachings of Christ and of the Holy Bible, and I hope to shepherd as many as possible to walk in the same path as Jesus, to gain entry into his kingdom. I tried to comfort people, to tell them that the faith of their loved ones would mean that they would enter heaven. But over the past 6 months, I've discovered that some of the departed never leave at all, and their presence at memorial services is more literal than I ever imagined possible. It's shaken my faith, likely beyond repair. Covenant Memorial Park has 3 chapels on its grounds, each designed for different sized services. As part of my duties, I maintain guest book records for each service, allowing mourners to sign in and leave messages for the deceased's family. It's a simple tradition, comforting to those who later read through the names and realize how many people cared about their loved one. 6 months ago, however, I began noticing something strange in those guest books. The first time was at a memorial service for someone named Dorothy Patterson, aged 83, who'd passed peacefully in her sleep. About 40 people attended, family members, church friends, neighbors, a typical service for a well-loved woman who'd lived a full life. After the service, I reviewed the guest book as I always did, planning to provide the family with a copy. Most signatures were familiar, people I'd seen at the service, names I recognized from the community. But one signature stood out: Walter Patterson. Walter Patterson was Dorothy's husband. He'd died in 2019, 4 years earlier. I'd conducted his memorial service myself. I assumed it was a mistake. Perhaps their son, Walter Jr., had signed his full name without the junior designation. But when I checked the family's contact information, Walter Jr. had signed the book separately, 2 lines below his father's signature. The handwriting was also different, so there were 2 distinct signatures and 2 different Walters. I I dismissed it as coincidence, perhaps a family member who had the same name, or someone who'd signed as a memorial gesture, honoring both Dorothy and her late husband. But it kept happening. At Gerald Morrison's service, 3 signatures appeared from people who died years before: his sister Anne, his childhood friend Marcus, and his first wife Helen. All 3 had been dead for over a decade. All 3 signatures appeared in the guest book, witnessed by the funeral staff who'd worked the service. So I went and I talked to Caroline Reed, who was our funeral director, and I asked her, "Did you notice anyone unusual at the Morrison service? Anyone signing the guest book who seemed out of place?" Caroline reviewed her notes. "About 57 attendees total, all family and close friends. Nothing unusual." "Do you remember seeing Anne Morrison sign the guest book?" "Gerald's sister." "Reverend, Anne Morrison died in 2013. She couldn't have been there." I showed her the signature. Caroline looked at it for a long moment, her expression shifting from confusion to something that looked like fear. I don't remember this. Reverend, I swear, I stood by the guest book during the service, greeting people as they signed. I would have noticed if someone had wrote a deceased person's name, but this handwriting, it looks old-fashioned, like something from decades ago. Over the next 3 months, I documented every memorial service carefully. I watched the guest books, monitored who signed them, and compared the signatures afterwards. And I discovered a pattern. At every single service, between 3 and 7 signatures appeared from people who were already dead, sometimes recently deceased within a year or 2. Sometimes they were dead for decades. All of them were connected somehow to the person being memorialized. But none of the funeral staff remembered seeing them sign. Caroline, the ushers, the musicians, the other chaplains who occasionally assisted, none of them had any memory of these people attending the services. I spoke to Caroline about it, and she told me, It's like they signed the book when no one's looking. But I'm standing right there the entire time. How could I miss 7 people coming in?" This was after the 5th incident, and I had no answer. Security cameras in the chapels only covered the entrances and main aisles, not the guest book stations. When I reviewed the footage, I saw the mourners approaching the table, signing the book and moving on, but I couldn't see what they were writing. So, I decided to conduct an experiment. At the next memorial service, for a man named Edward Holloway, age 71, I positioned myself directly beside the guest book. I would watch every single person who signed, note their names, and compare them afterward. The service proceeded normally. 63 attendees, all of them filing past to sign the book. I watched each one carefully, noting their names and faces. After the service, I reviewed the guest book immediately. There were 71 signatures. That was 8 more people than those who had attended, and among those names were those I had recognized from the other cemetery records. There was Edward's mother Ruth, who died in 1998, his brother Thomas, who died in 2008, his childhood friend David, who died in 2015. I had watched the guest book for the entire service. I had not seen these people sign, yet their signatures were there, in handwriting that matched documents from their own funerals decades earlier. That night, I stayed in Chapel B, where Edward Holloway's service had been held. The chapel was empty, quiet, lit only by the eternal flame candle near the altar. I opened the guest book and stared at the impossible signatures. I looked up at the altar, at the flame, and I could only ask, why? Why are you signing these books? Why are you attending services for people you've already left behind? The candle flickered. There was no breeze, and I heard faint, barely audible, almost a whisper, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We never left. I spun around, but the chapel was empty. Just me, the guest book, and the signatures of the dead. We never left. The whisper repeated. There were multiple voices now, all overlapping. We're still here, waiting, attending, mourning those who join us. The guest book's pages began turning on their own, flipping backwards through months of services. Every page showed the same pattern, signatures from the deceased, attending the memorials of those who died after them. We come to welcome them, to show them they're not alone, to prove that death doesn't end connection. We sign the books so the living will know the dead never truly leave. The candle went out, plunging the chapel into darkness. I fumbled my phone, using its flashlight to find my way to the door. Behind me, I heard the sound of pen on paper, scratching, writing, signing. Dozens of signatures being added to the guest book by hands I couldn't see. I ran from the chapel and went straight to my car. I locked my doors, and I had the engine running. I don't think I ever broke the speed limit before, but I definitely did as I raced back home. I requested a leave of absence the next morning. I told the Memorial Park Board I needed time for personal reflection, that 17 years of conducting funerals had taken an emotional toll. They granted me 4 weeks and assigned another chaplain to cover my services. I spent those weeks trying to convince myself that I had imagined everything. How could I have not? Stress-induced hallucinations had to be. The strain of too many funerals, too many grief-stricken families, too many years surrounded by death. I wish that was the case. Then Caroline called me. Reverend Whitlock, I know you're on leave, but there's something you need to see. I went back to the cemetery and met her at Chapel A, where a memorial service had been held that morning for a woman named Grace Henderson, aged 94. Caroline led me to the guest book. Her hands were shaking. The service ended just an hour ago. I reviewed the signatures immediately because I needed to check on something. She opened the book to the last page. The 63 signatures from the living mourners. There were 12 additional names. Deceased family members, friends from decades past, and Grace's late husband. And at the bottom of the page, handwriting I recognized as my own, was a signature that made my heart stop. James Michael Whitlock. Date of service, December 28th, 2024. I looked at it and I couldn't believe anything. I didn't write this, Caroline. I know, Reverend, but December 28th, that's tomorrow. I stared at the signature, my signature, written in my own handwriting beneath a date of service that hadn't occurred yet. The dead had been signing guest books for their own services, and now my name was in the book, one day before my supposed memorial service. This isn't possible, I said to Caroline, but my voice sounded hollow, even to me. Then Caroline opened to another page. There's more. This is from Grace Henderson's service file. I found it in our records. She handed me a printed order form. Memorial service for Reverend James Michael Whitlock. Request by Anonymous. Date of service, December 28th, 2024. Chapel A. Prepaid in full. Someone had arranged my memorial service, paid for it, scheduled it for tomorrow, and the dead had already signed the guest book, welcoming me to join them. I'm writing this on December 27th, 2024. I have less than 24 hours before my scheduled memorial service, a service I didn't arrange for a death that hasn't happened yet. I called the police, but they found no evidence of fraud or threat. I called the Memorial Park Board, but they said the payment was legitimate and that the service was scheduled according to proper procedures. I tried to cancel it, but Caroline said the contract is ironclad. Whoever paid for it has the legal right to hold the service, and my objections aren't grounds for cancellation. The dead have been attending memorial services at Covenant Memorial Park for longer than I've been chaplain. They signed the guest books. They mourn for the newly deceased. They welcome those who joined them. And now they've signed a guest book a day before my death. I'm sending this to the TheDreadJournal tonight. By the time you receive it, my memorial service will have already been held. The guest book will have signatures from the dead welcoming me to their eternal congregation. And somewhere in Covenant Memorial Park, another chaplain will conduct services, never noticing the extra signatures in the guest books, never realizing that the dead attend every memorial, signing their names in invisible ink that appears only when no one's watching. I once believed that death wasn't something you fear so long as you lived a good life and held Jesus in your heart. Now, I know the truth. Death isn't a threshold you cross once. It's a gathering you attend forever, mourning each new arrival while the living stand oblivious, reading names in guest books and never understanding that half the signatures come from hands that have been buried for decades. If God is real, then I pray that he will save me and the souls lost in this nightmare. If you're enjoying this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you get all of our latest videos. And if you have stories that you want to share with us, please send them to me, Ulrich Mossberg, at TheDreadJournal@gmail.com. I'm taking a huge risk by sending this to the TheDreadJournal. If I'm lucky, maybe people will just laugh this off and assume it's some joke, but I have to tell the truth. Someone has to know about this, even if it costs me everything. Ulrich, if you're reading this, then thank you. I needed the chance to share this. My name is David Cortez, and I'm 37 years old. I've worked in my family's restoration business since I was 16, learning the trade from my father, who learned it from his father. We specialize in historical preservation, old churches, monuments, and cemetery structures that need careful, skilled hands to repair. I always thought I'd inherit the business someday, continue the family tradition, maybe pass it on to my own kids if I ever have them. That was the plan. A simple, honest plan. Then I opened the Hargrove Mausoleum at Riverside Memorial Cemetery, and everything changed. Riverside Memorial is one of the oldest cemeteries in upstate New York, established in 1872. The Cemetery Board had hired us to restore 6 historic mausoleums, stone structures that had deteriorated over a century and a half of harsh winters. The Hargrove Mausoleum was our third project, built in 1889 for the Hargrove family, local industrialists who'd made their fortune in textiles. The structure was elaborate marble with detailed engravings and stained glass windows that had been damaged by weather and time. When I opened the heavy iron door for the first time in what the cemetery record said was 30 years, I expected dust, cobwebs, and the musty smell of enclosed stone. Instead, I found fresh offerings. Candles, not old, dried-out ones, but recently burned, wax still soft to the touch, flowers in glass vases with water that hadn't evaporated, food offerings on small plates, bread that wasn't moldy, fruit that wasn't rotted, a small dish of what looked like homemade cookies, and notes. Handwritten letters on modern paper, dated within the last month, addressed to the deceased Hargroves. Dear great-great-grandmother Margaret, I got the promotion at work. Thank you for watching over me. Your loving great-great-grandson, Thomas. Grandmother Elizabeth, the surgery went well. The doctors say I'll make a full recovery. I know you were there with me. Love always, Sarah. The notes were signed by people with the Hargrove surname, descendants thanking their ancestors for protection and blessings. I took photos and brought them to the cemetery owner, Richard Sutton, a businessman in his 60s who'd purchased Riverside Memorial 5 years ago as an investment property. I walked into his office and looked at him in the eyes. Someone's been leaving offerings in the Hargrove Mausoleum, I explained, showing him the photos. Fresh candles, food, notes, all recent. The mausoleum's supposed to be locked. Only cemetery staff should have keys. Richard studied the photos, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. I'll check our key logs, but this is highly unusual. None of the Hargrove descendants have requested access in years. Well, it could be trespassing, I suggested. Somebody could be breaking in at night. Then we'll need to document it, Richard said, making his decision quickly. I'll have security cameras installed. Cover the entrances to all 6 mausoleums you're working on. If someone's trespassing, we'll have evidence for the police. It seemed like a reasonable plan. Document the activity, identify who is breaking in, handle it through the proper channels. We installed 4 cameras over the next 2 days, covering approaches to the mausoleums from multiple angles, high definition, motion activated, with night vision capabilities. 3 days later, Richard called me at 6 a.m. His voice was shaking. David, you need to come to my office, now. Don't tell anyone else, just come. I drove to the cemetery immediately, finding Richard in his office staring at his computer screen. His face was pale. I watched the footage from last night. You need to see this. He played the video. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. The camera angle covered the entrance to the Hargrove Mausoleum, clear view of the iron door and the stone steps leading up to it. A figure approached from the left side of the frame. An elderly woman, moving slowly but steadily, carrying a basket. She wore a simple dress that looked decades out of style. Her silver hair was pulled back in a bun. She opened the mausoleum door, which should have been locked, and entered. The camera captured her inside through the damage-stained glass windows, placing candles and arranging items from her basket. That's Margaret Hargrove, Richard said. I've seen her photograph in the cemetery archives. She died in 1924. She's buried in that mausoleum. I stared at the screen and looked at Richard. No, that's impossible. It's someone who looks like her, someone in some kind of period costume. No. No, David, watch the rest. Over the next 2 hours of footage, 5 more figures visited the mausoleum. All of them matched descriptions and photographs of people buried in Riverside Memorial, all dead for decades, and every one of them left offerings not on their own graves, but on the crypts of their descendants. It's not just the Hargrove Mausoleum, Richard continued. He pulled up the footage from the other cameras. This is all 6 mausoleums that you're restoring. Every night, the dead are visiting their descendants' graves, leaving offerings, maintaining connections. The footage was undeniable. Men and women in period clothing, matching photographs of the deceased, visiting mausoleums that should have been locked, tending to the crypts of family members who had died after them. This is incredible, Richard said, and I heard something in his voice that made me uneasy. There was not fear in it. There was excitement. Do you understand what this means? Proof of life after death. Documented evidence of the dead visiting their descendants. This footage could be worth millions. Whoa, Richard. We can't what? Can't share the most significant supernatural documentation in history? This will make Riverside Memorial famous. People will pay anything to visit a cemetery where the dead are proven to return. No. Richard, calm down and think for a second. Nothing good ever comes from disturbing the dead. My father always taught me that. When you work on graves, you do it with respect and you leave things alone. You don't exploit them. Oh, but I'm not exploiting anyone. All I'm doing is sharing evidence. Tomorrow, I'm contacting the media outlets. This footage goes public and Riverside Memorial becomes the most famous cemetery in the country. I tried to argue, but Richard had already made up his mind. He was seeing dollar signs, not consequences. I returned to work the next morning under the supervision of a city council representative, Mrs. Patricia Holloway, who had been sent to oversee the restoration projects and ensure they met historical preservation standards. Around 11 a.m., she received a phone call. I saw her face go pale, and she listened, and then she ended the call and turned to me. Richard Sutton died this morning. Car accident on Route 9. Lost control. Went off the road into a ravine. What? When was this? She looked at me and closed her eyes. About 8 a.m. He was on his way to meet with news outlets. Everything in his car burned. His laptop, phone, all of his files. The fire department said it was unusually intense for a standard vehicle fire. I felt my hands shaking. Richard had been planning to sell the footage, and now he was dead. All evidence destroyed. Wait, the security footage from the cemetery. Do you know if... Mrs. Holloway shook my head at me. The cemetery's entire security system failed last night. Hard drives corrupted. All footage was lost. The technician said he'd never seen anything like it. That afternoon, when I was working alone in the Hargrove Mausoleum, repairing damaged marble, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw my grandmother. Abuela Rosa had died 6 years ago. I'd been at her funeral, watched her casket lowered into the ground in the family plot here at Riverside Memorial. I'd visited her grave dozens of times since, and even more so once I started working here. But now she stood in the mausoleum doorway, and she was wrong somehow with the way that she was looking at me. Her body was emaciated, skin hanging loose on her frame, patches of rot visible on her exposed arms. Her dress was the same one she'd been buried in, but was now stained and deteriorating. Her smile, that warm, loving smile I remembered from my childhood, that was still there, shining through the decay. "Hijo," she said, her voice raspy but unmistakably hers. "You need to listen very carefully." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Terror and grief warred inside me. "The man who wanted to sell our secrets, oh, he paid the price we all agreed upon. The dead keep their vigil in peace, and the living do not disturb us. That is the balance." Pero abuela, what? "You saw what we do. We visit our descendants. We leave offerings. We maintain the connections between the living and the dead. This has been our way for generations, and it must remain secret." She moved closer, and I could smell the decay, see the way that her flesh had begun to separate from bone. But her eyes, they were still kind, still the eyes of the woman who'd raised me when my parents worked long hours. "You will keep the secret, mijo. You will remove the cameras. You will destroy any remaining evidence, and you will never speak of what you've seen." And if I don't? Then I will be forced to take your life. I love you, mijo, but the secret must be kept. Do you understand? I nodded, unable to do anything else. My grandmother, my dead, rotting grandmother who still loved me, had just threatened to end my life if I didn't comply. She reached out and touched my cheek with fingers that were cold and partially skeletal. "Good boy. Finish your work here. Remove the cameras. And remember, when your time comes, you'll join us. You'll visit your descendants. Leave them offerings. Watch over them through death as you watched over them in life." Then she was gone, simply vanishing between one moment and the next. Spent the rest of the day removing every security camera, destroying every hard drive, eliminating any evidence that we'd ever documented what happened at night in Riverside Memorial. The restoration work continued over the next 3 months. Beautiful, careful work that preserved the resting places of the dead, who weren't resting at all. I'm 37 years old. If I'm lucky, I'll have maybe another 40 or 50 years ahead of me. Maybe I'll inherit my father's business, get married, have children, and build a life. And when I die, I'll be buried in the Cortez family plot at Riverside Memorial, right next to Abuela Rosa. But I won't rest. I'll rise at night, my body decaying but my consciousness intact, and I'll visit my descendants' graves. I'll leave offerings for my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. I'll watch over them from death, trapped in an eternal cycle of love and decay. The dead at Riverside Memorial aren't at rest. They're working, maintaining the connections they had in life, keeping watch, and someday I'll be one of them. I still work in restoration. I still plan to inherit my father's business. But every time I work in a cemetery, I wonder if the dead inside are truly at rest, if they're waiting for the night to fall so they can rise and visit the descendants they left behind. Abuela Rosa told me that I needed to keep the secret, and I have. But this knowledge weighs on me. The dead at Riverside Memorial love their descendants enough to never leave them. And that love is the most horrifying curse I've ever encountered. My name is Claire Whitmore, and I'm 23 years old. I graduated from college last year with a degree in mortuary science, but I needed practical field experience before I could get my mortician's license. So I've been working as an apprentice land surveyor with my uncle, Benjamin Whitmore, mapping cemetery boundaries and plotting new burial sections. People always found my fascination with death strange. In high school, my classmates called me morbid. In college, my roommates thought I was depressing. But I'm not obsessed with death. I just understand that it's inevitable, and someone needs to care for the deceased with dignity and respect. I thought working with my uncle would help me learn the practical side of cemetery management. I thought it would prepare me for my future career. I was right. Just not in the way I expected. 3 months ago, my Uncle Ben and I were hired by Fairhaven Cemetery in northern Vermont to survey a new section for expansion. Fairhaven was running out of burial space, and they'd purchased adjacent land that needed to be mapped, measured, and prepared for grave plots. It was straightforward work. We'd done dozens of these surveys before. Walk the property, mark boundaries, identify any obstacles or issues, create detailed maps showing where new graves could be placed. Uncle Ben had sent me to the northwestern corner of the new property, a wooded area that would need clearing before it could be used for burials. He told me to map the terrain and handed me some surveying equipment, and also told me to note any large rocks, tree roots, and drainage issues, basically anything that could complicate excavation. So I walked into the woods alone, following the property line Uncle Ben had marked with orange flags. The area was quiet, shaded by old-growth trees that had probably been there for over a century. That's when I found the graves. There were 12 of them, arranged into 2 neat rows, each with an elaborate headstone. Polished granite and marble, freshly carved, looking like they'd been installed yesterday. The grass around them was neatly trimmed. There were flowers planted in decorative borders. But according to the cemetery records I'd reviewed, this land had never been used for burials. It had just been purchased. There shouldn't have been any graves there at all. I approached the first headstone, pulling out my phone to photograph it for Uncle Ben. Margaret Ellen Foster, 1962 to 2024. Beloved mother and grandmother. She returned to the earth that called her. The death date was November 18th, 2024, 5 days from now. I moved to the next headstone. My hands were starting to shake. Jonathan Michael Reed, 1989 to 2024. Devoted father and husband, taken before his time. Death date, November 22nd, 2024, 9 days from now. Every headstone I examined showed a death date in the future. Some were a week away, others a month, one as far as December 15th. But they all had elaborate engravings and specific epitaphs, as if someone had already planned their funerals down to the last detail. Then I reached the 8th headstone, and my blood ran cold. Patricia Ann Hoffman, cherished teacher and mentor. She taught us well. Death date, November 20th, 2024, 1 week from now. Mrs. Hoffman had been my high school chemistry teacher. I had seen her just yesterday at the supermarket, looking healthy and cheerful, telling me about her plans to visit her daughter in Boston over Thanksgiving. She was alive, very much alive, yet there was a headstone with her name, death date, and an epitaph that seemed tailor-made for a teacher right in front of me. So I did the only thing I could. I photographed every headstone. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe someone with access to cemetery equipment had created these fake graves as a joke. Maybe there was a logical explanation. But the headstones were too real, too detailed. The ground around them looked disturbed, as if graves had been dug in, and the engravings were of professional quality. This was not something that could be done cheaply or quickly. I called Uncle Ben on the radio. "You need to come see this. There are graves in the northwestern section, 12 of them, with headstones." Uncle Ben arrived 15 minutes later, along with Mr. Gerald Patterson, the cemetery director. He was a light-hearted man in his 60s, but he did take his work seriously. I led them to the spot where I'd found the graves, my photos ready to show them if they had any doubts. But when we reached the clearing, there was nothing there. Just trees, underbrush, and the natural terrain I'd been sent to survey. No headstones, no manicured grass, no flowers. There was nothing to indicate that any graves had ever been there. "Claire, what exactly are we looking at?" Uncle Ben asked me, and I looked at him flabbergasted. There were graves here, 12 of them, elaborate headstones. Look, I have photos. But when I pulled out my phone, the photos I'd taken were gone. Not deleted, just gone, as if I'd never taken them at all. The gallery showed images from earlier in the day, then jumped to a blank space where the headstone photos should have been. Mr. Patterson laughed, but he seemed kind about it. "Oh, young people, they always like to cause trouble. I appreciate the creativity, Miss Whitmore, but we have real work to do." "What? But I am not making this up. There were headstones right here with names and death dates." "Claire," my Uncle Ben's voice was sharp, "that's enough. This isn't funny. You're wasting everyone's times with bad jokes." But Uncle Ben, it's not a joke." They were already walking away. Uncle Ben was shaking his head in disappointment. Mr. Patterson still laughing and going on about young people and their pranks. I returned to the clearing after they left, but the graves remained invisible. I could see the trees, the undergrowth, the natural terrain, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that the headstones were still there, just invisible to everyone but me. Over the next week, I continued surveying work, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Stress, maybe, or exhaustion from long days in the field. I wish I was right about that. On November 20th, the news reported that Patricia Ann Hoffman, 53, had died after falling from a cliff while hiking in the nearby Green Mountains. Rescue teams had recovered her body that morning. The death was being investigated as an accident. I drove to the northwestern section of Fairhaven Cemetery immediately. Surveying work was still ongoing, and the land had not yet been prepared for official burials. But there, exactly where I'd seen the headstone before, was Mrs. Hoffman's grave. A fresh plot, recently dug and filled, with the same elaborate granite headstone that I'd photographed just a week earlier. Margaret Ann Hoffman, cherished teacher and mentor. She taught us well. Everything matched exactly. The epitaph, the dates, the style of the stone. Mrs. Hoffman had been buried in a grave that I'd seen a week before she died, on land that wasn't even prepared for proper burials yet. Over the next month, more people from the phantom headstones died. Margaret Ellen Foster, heart attack on November 18th. Jonathan Michael Reed, car accident on November 22nd. 7 others, all dying exactly when their headstones predicted, all buried in graves that appeared to me weeks before their deaths. Each time someone died, I would return to the northwestern section and find their grave already there, complete and perfect, as if it had always existed. But whenever I brought Uncle Ben or Mr. Patterson to look, they only saw the undeveloped land. I was the only one who could see the graves, the only one who knew that death was being plotted and planned, marked in stone before it actually happened. Eventually, I stopped trying to tell people. Uncle Ben had already written me off as unreliable, making jokes about my overactive imagination. Mr. Patterson had started questioning whether I was suitable for mortuary work if I couldn't distinguish reality from fantasy. He had long abandoned the idea that I was telling jokes. So I kept quiet and watched the headstones predict death after death with perfect accuracy. Then, in early December, I saw a new headstone. Benjamin Charles Whitmore, 1968 to 2025, devoted uncle and mentor. He measured the earth and found his rest. Death date, January 12th, 2025, 1 month away. I ran to Uncle Ben immediately, finding him in his truck reviewing survey maps. Uncle Ben, I need to talk to you. It's important. Please just listen. Claire, if this is about those imaginary graves again, it's about you. There's a headstone with your name on it. It says you're going to die on January 12th. Please, you have to believe me. You have to be careful. Uncle Ben closed his survey map slowly, looked at me with eyes that were filled with pity and frustration. Claire, I'm going to say this as gently as possible. I think you need to take some time off. Maybe see a professional, because this obsession with death has crossed the line from career interest to something that's just unhealthy. Uncle Ben, I'm not obsessed. I'm trying to warn you. Look, Claire, I'm going to be on vacation in January anyway. I'm leaving right after we finish this survey. I'll spend 2 weeks in Florida, far away from this cemetery or whatever death predictions you might have. So whatever you think you're seeing, it's not going to happen. He wouldn't listen. No one would listen. We finished the survey work on January 10th. Uncle Ben left for Florida the next morning, texting me photos of palm trees and beaches, joking that he was very much alive and enjoying the sunshine. On January 12th, I received a call from my aunt. Uncle Ben had died the night before from alcohol poisoning. He'd been drinking heavily on vacation, celebrating the completion of the survey project. His heart had stopped sometime after midnight. That's why the death certificate listed the date as January 12th, 2025. Exactly what the headstone had predicted. I drove to the northwestern section of Fairhaven Cemetery, which was now officially open for burials. Uncle Ben's grave was there, complete and perfect, the headstone matching exactly what I'd seen a month earlier. And beside it, I saw the final headstone. Claire Marie Whitmore, 2001 to 2025. She understood too late. Death always has its due. The death date was listed as January 18th, 2025, 3 days from when I discovered it. That's why I'm writing this on that same day. I have 3 days left before my own predicted death. I've tried to run, tried to leave Vermont, tried to escape whatever fate is carved in that stone, but I know it won't matter. Mrs. Hoffman tried to be careful hiking. Uncle Ben was on vacation, far from any danger. Every person whose headstone I saw tried to avoid their predicted death, and every single one of them died when the stone said they would. Death always has its due. That's what my epitaph says, and I finally understand what it means. These aren't predictions, they're appointments. Scheduled deaths that can't be avoided, no matter how far you run or how careful you are. I'm sending this to TheDreadJournal today, on January 15th. By the time you receive it, I know I'll be dead. 3 days from now, on January 18th, something will happen to me. I don't know what, but I know it will happen. Because my grave is already waiting in Fairhaven Cemetery, on land I helped survey, marked with a stone that appeared weeks before my death. If you're reading this, then you need to understand that death isn't random. It's planned, plotted, surveyed like land waiting for development. Some of us can see graves before they're filled, and seeing them doesn't mean you can avoid them. It just means you know when your appointment is scheduled. Death always has its due, and mine is due in 3 days.